Okay, it's Monday, which means against my better judgment it's time to go to Reddit and see what we can find in this hive of scum and villainy. I had indeed meant to make this video yesterday, but something happened and I did not have the time. Please take this squid as recompense. And, so, I've been to the Overwatch University subreddit ahead of time, just scraped all the questions off the first call page, and we're going from now on some footage of Dragon Ball FighterZ plays in the background, because it's a better game than Overwatch. And if you're wondering which side I'm on, just look for whichever side started with Android 21. So first off, how do you counter Barrier, Bastion, and May comps? So, I mean, there's a few things you can do. The thing is that, most of them are going to require, like, a degree of teamwork, which will be difficult to come by and large, on Overwatch. We aren't big on teamwork in this community, funnily enough, considering the message of the games and all that. The game. There's only one game right now. So, one of the simplest options. People don't like when you suggest this one, but one of the simplest options is to run a Bastion right back at them. Because if there's double barriers in the way, Bastion's gonna chew through both those barriers real fast, dude. So, especially if you can get a Batista on your team, you can just put the lamp around a corner, have Bastion sit right there. They can't kill Bastion. That's kind of what the lamp does, and they can't hit the lamp because it's around a corner. So Bastion gets to just sit there and shred the two shields, and then problem solved. You can pick Sombra and imp the whole team, in which case they are extremely unhappy. The problem there is that, first off, it can be difficult to build ult charge if your teammates are bad as Sombra, because if they're not doing anything to, like, distract the enemy team and you're playing against, like, double barrier May Bastion, it can be very difficult for you to build ult charge, so you've pretty much got to make sure that one ult that you get off is really good, and the unfortunate thing there is that, you know, imp by itself is worthless, so you're hoping that your teammates actually do something afterwards, which is inconsistent, shall we say. What else? So if you can displace the enemy team, this makes things a lot easier. With this kind of comp, if you can get the Orisa, the problem is pretty much solved. So if you can boop Orisa out of position, you know, Lucio, it'd be hard for Lucio to do it, like Hammond, Pharah, even another Orisa plus Roadhog. If you can displace the Orisa, the shield comp suddenly becomes a lot less good, and becomes a lot easier to get to Bastion if only Toes is in the way. Or, you know, if you're doing Roadhog and all that, you can displace the Bastion, and that'll do it as well. If you can get two people to coordinate, you can do May Roadhog. May puts her wall under Bastion. Bastion is now on top of the shield. Roadhog hooks Bastion. Bastion is now dead. Problem solved. You can run, like, a dive comp at them, essentially, and, just try and pressure them enough, but, you know, that requires, to get rid of a double shield Bastion comp with a dive comp would require a lot of coordination, more coordination than you're likely to find on the average ladder game. Be honest with you, like, the easiest ways are gonna be, like, run Bastion right back at them, or try and displace them, like May Roadhog, hook the person, kill them, easy peasy. Something else you can do is you can just get somebody to go on the point behind them, and this is purely because people who play this game don't know what to do when this happens, right? So if you have someone on your team, maybe the Sombra, this will, you know, a little bit of column A, little column B here. If you got the Sombra back there on the point, then the people on ladder are not going to know who to send back to deal with that. And sometimes they'll send back, like, the Orisa, or the Bastion, or maybe, like, half their team rotates around to kill this one Sombra. And then suddenly, it becomes a lot easier to get through the door, because their main tank left, their Bastion left, what have you, right? So that's also a good one, just because people don't know what to do, dude. You'll see, like, half the team just like, are you doing it? Are you doing it? We better both go, right? You know, and then the Orisa and the Bastion both leave, and you walk through the door. The problem then is you've still got to rely on your teammates walking through the door, which is sometimes too much to ask by itself. So, yeah. The problem is that the double barrier Bastion May comp is using teamwork. It is hard to beat teamwork by yourself, because you are always just going to be like one person fighting multiple people. Very hard to do. So, those are about your best options, though. So, next up is, what are your opinions on Tracer's current state right now? I really liked the top voted comment in this thread, which just said, don't. And that's more or less a decent summation of the situation. Tracer and Genji, the meta does not suit them right now. I don't know who I would say gets the shorter end of the stick out of Tracer or Genji. I think it might be Genji, just because the meta doesn't suit him, and then he got the ult nerf. Genji is always more dependent on his ultimate than Tracer was, so I think it might be Genji, but neither of them are having a great time right now, playing against, like, the kinds of comps that we just talked about a second ago. And then, you know, Genji's got the ult nerf on top of that. I don't think these heroes are unplayable, and I know they're not unplayable because I see these heroes win games still. So, there you go. Obviously, they're not unplayable. Someone in the thread went so far as to call Tracer basically a throw pick. I don't agree with that. Especially not when we're talking about, like, fucking ladder where most people are, like, gold and plat, right? Like, nah, you're probably gonna be fine to play Tracer in most of these situations still. It's just, you know, it's going to be harder because the enemy team is now people that are harder to kill, basically. A much more hostile environment for you. But, hey, if you're good at Tracer, like, you're good at Tracer, dude. You'll find a way to make something work. It's just, it's going to be really hard sometimes. So, my thoughts on Tracer currently are she is weak, just like Genji, but not unplayable. Just encouraged to pick someone else, if we want to put things diplomatically. Next up, how do you win teamfights without relying on DPS? So, I kind of begrudge this question at all, because the implicit, like, well, I was going to say the implicit implication, which is a wonderful sentence, is that basically all DPS players are bad. Now, I feel like I've seen this before. I feel like I've seen this kind of complaint once or twice before in the wild, that the DPS are doing absolutely nothing, and they should probably go kill themselves, to be honest, which is the appropriate response to have when one does badly at a video game. And I feel like it might always be the tanks and the supports that are saying this, oddly enough. But you know what? So, the thing with this question is that 9 times out of 10, in these situations where the DPS is doing nothing and nothing is dying, the issue is, most frequently, actually with the tanks and the healers. Because it becomes extremely difficult / impossible to do any damage if your tanks and your healers are doing ridiculous things, which is frequently the case. You've got your tanks suicide charging and diving into the enemy team. You've got Lucio, who thinks he's making a highlight compilation right now, so he's, you know, purely jumping in by himself to try and get sick plays. And Moira is currently sipping their main tank, so if you're playing like McCree, and you just watched your Reinhardt stand in front of a Bastion and get minced to death, while Moira was busy sipping ineffectually at the shield, what do exactly? You know? You get fucked, is what you do. So, I find the question to be, basically, I'm not going to answer the question as it was written, because the answer is most often, well, you're probably not doing enough to facilitate your DPS actually doing DPS. I find it is very rarely the case that the DPS is just bad. That is sometimes the case. Doubtlessly, sometimes DPS players are bad. We have all seen the Widowmaker. But not always. Frequently not always. It is frequently the tanks that are at fault, actually, because they have no concept of how to create space. They just, like, stand around in the open taking a bunch of damage. They let the shields get broken. They suicide charge in. They don't actually do anything to make space for their teammates. I find that is most often the problem. So before you're worrying about how you win when your DPS are bad, maybe you should be looking instead like, well, what could I do to facilitate the DPS? You could be playing the wrong tank to play with your team for what they're going for. Because if your team around you has picked, like, Genji Pharah, and then you picked Orisa, you're not going to be doing a lot to facilitate those DPS actually doing something, because they're going to be off doing their thing, and you're going to be sat at the choke point shooting away at the other Arista and Toze's barrier, not breaking it because you're doing it by yourself and just sitting in the choke point forever. It would be a more productive use of your time to be playing someone like Hammond or Winston instead, and actually diving in there with those heroes trying to get something done. Similarly, if your teammates have picked, like, Ashe McCree and you're playing Winston, if you're not, like, doing this to counterpick someone on the enemy team, you are not doing as much to facilitate those DPS as you would be if you were playing Orisa or Reinhardt or Toze, and then you would be giving them a lot more space than you probably are as Winston, where you're just jumping in, leaving your teammates to their own devices, and just kind of hoping they're able to get through the doorway while you're doing something behind the enemy team, which is not always the case, especially if the other tank on your team is like fucking Zarya or Roadhog, right? Getting through the door gets difficult in that situation still, so that's what I would say to that question. Before you worry about how you win without a team doing any damage, maybe think about what you could do to make your DPS do more damage. If you're the support, you don't get a lot of options in this. The meta supports right now are Moira, Lucio. You can't do a whole lot to, like, facilitate your teammates as those heroes, outside of, like, use your speed boost as much as you can. That's about it, really, to be honest with you. So, yeah. That's what I would say, though. It's very rarely actually the DPS's fault. It's usually their teammates around them are not doing anything to facilitate them actually doing big damage. So there you go. So next up is getting reported for playing Sombra. What do? And, you know, there are a few heroes in the... This person was talking about how, like, they, don't like to join voice chat because DPS almost always get shit on, especially if you're playing someone that's someone like Sombra, right? And I mean, here's what you do, right? You don't engage with the people, and if they're calling for you to be reported because you're playing Sombra, they are abusing the report system. So you can report them for that right back at them. But, like, just don't interact with them. Just don't bother, dude. Like, these people will tell you, oh, you're playing Sombra? You gotta be in voice chat, dude. How you gonna play such a teamwork-centric hero if you're not in voice chat to tell them when you're gonna use your ultimate? Because there's no other methods of telling your teammates you're gonna use your ultimate in this game. Bruh. Like, people will tell you you can't, like, no matter who you're playing, you gotta use voice chat. People told me I had to use voice chat when I was playing Reinhardt. Got to Masters playing Reinhardt without ever talking to another human being. How about that? How strange. It's almost like this game isn't really that complicated, you know? This might, you know, we play a lot more complicated games than Overwatch without voice chat being like a mandatory thing. So I think we can get by in Overwatch without it. So I would say to do the exact same thing as I would say to a Widowmaker player, which is don't interact with the people. You can't convince them that you're doing well. Like, just don't bother. Mute them, whatever you gotta do. If they're calling for you to be reported, report them for abusing the report features, because you can't get reported for playing the hero you want to play. So that's them abusing the system instead. And, like, if you're playing a hero like Widowmaker or Sombra, it is very difficult for your teammates to know if you're ever actually doing anything most of the time, but the enemy team sure as fuck knows. 9 times out of 10 what happens in these situations, or at least it feels like that. Maybe more like 8, 7 out of 10. What usually happens is your teammates will start bitching in the match chat that you're throwing, and someone on the enemy team will go, "No, they fucking aren't, you idiot." And that will be and then that will be your teammates very mad, suddenly. Well, they were already mad, weren't they? And, you know, don't worry, like, for all intents and purposes, these people on your team, they cease to exist in, like, 15 minutes' time. You'll probably never see them again, unless you're on the very extreme ends of the SR brackets. Then you might see them again, right? Every now and then you'll see them a couple times, but very rarely. These people will stop existing soon, so just, like, try not to let it get to you. That you can't be reported, you can't be banned for just picking the hero that you want to pick. So don't worry about it that much. Just fuck them, basically, is the summation of it. There's a lot of assholes in this community, you know? You have to kind of learn to just, you know, and it sucks it's this way. You just kind of have to learn to, like, ignore people that are stupid assholes. And that's my thoughts on that situation. So there you go. So next up is, how do I use Mercy's ult correctly? And this wasn't really talking about, like, what do I do while I'm using Valkyrie. This was more about what times should I be using Valkyrie. I guess I could have... This is how it was written, but I could have reformatted this question as when to use Mercy's ultimate. But it's what we have now, so it's what we're getting. So for when, you know, it's gonna depend, which is the really easy but lame answer. So you can just use Valkyrie for self-preservation. It's one of those ultimates where if something really bad is happening, you can just use it to eject yourself from that situation. Winston's jumping on me and my team ain't helping, I leave. Genji's using Dragon Blade near me, I leave. You know, like that kind of thing. And that's fine to do. It's not one of the, like, you know, you can even do this with Transcendence, right? There are some times when using Trance because you're gonna die is the correct option. Mercy's ultimate doesn't have the same kind of utility that Trance does, so you are very justified in using it to save yourself if something bad is happening. You can use it before a team fight has happened to just try and prompt your team to actually move forward, but depending on your teammates, they might just not do anything after you've done that, so use that one with caution. Pretty much, you're just looking to use it, like, as early in the fight as you can, pretty much. Support ultimates are this way, the exceptions being Lucio and Sound Barrier and Transcendence, because they are being used to counter other ultimates. They have a specific use case, but with other support ultimates, the goal is to have them affecting as many people as possible. Because if you're using Valkyrie and you're damage boosting 6 people, you're not damage boosting, if you're damage boosting 5 people who've all got their ultimates, that's a lot more effective, that's a lot more value for your ultimate than if you use it halfway through the fight when half your team is dead and they've already blown their ultimates. So you're just looking to use it as soon as possible because more people will be able to benefit from it, and they're more likely to have their ultimates as well, which you would like them to be using during Valkyrie, so you can damage boost it. And that's basically it. Those are like all the uses that those are all the reasons that you would want to use it. Do be careful using it to try and, like, prompt movement out of your team, because sometimes your team just won't do shit. It's not quite like Coalescence where you use it and people just sort of instinctually start moving forward. Valkyrie doesn't get that same kind of effect a lot of the time, so use that one with caution, but self-preservation and just as early in the fight as possible are basically the go-tos. So, now, let's see, next up is, how am I supposed to get out of gold? If DPS, as DPS, if every tank at this SR, I'm gonna have to actually, this isn't fit on screen, it's that long. Let me start again. How am I supposed to get out of gold as DPS if every tank at this SR is too scared to push in front of their team and won't listen to callouts or give them? So, before I say anything about this, I'm just gonna read to you the top comment from the thread, because my boy Shotgun Pete _ on Reddit pretty much has it figured out. So it was, get better at the game. Then you will climb regardless of your team. Why are your tanks standing still? Most likely because they are pussies who like to play passive. So pick a hero that does well in a passive environment. Pick Tracer, Genji, Doomfist, and get a few picks. Your team will soon start to move through the choke when they see the kill feed light up. Take Sombra and hack their main tank. Your own tank will feel more comfortable and subconsciously play more aggressively. Literally, the only way to climb is by getting better at the game. You are not gold because your tanks are too passive. You are gold because you have the skill level of a gold player. And Shotgun Pete's basically got it, yeah. So this is like the inverse of the question we had earlier, how do you win a game without any DPS, right? Now it's like, how can I do DPS when my teammates are pussies, right? So, I mean, Shotgun Pete's more or less got it, to be honest with you. You can pick a hero that's more adept in a passive environment, so, you know, long range, hit scan, DPS, just long range DPS. People that don't need to be going in, or you pick a flanker and you go in and you try and get picks because you don't need your teammates to necessarily come in with you, you just need to be there, they just need to, like, be in the vicinity. Yeah, that's kind of, I admit, I included this one mostly just because I really liked Shotgun Pete _'s response, which I thought was pretty accurate. Yeah, and, you know, I don't know what I know, actually. I just lost my own train of thought midway through that, actually. Yeah, so, you know, it's like basically, this and the other question are, like, kind of just down to mentality, where it's like, there's really no point blaming the other category of heroes, right? You're playing a tank and you're like, my DPS are trash. That's not productive. You're playing a DPS and you're like, my tanks are trash. That's also not productive. You can't control other people. The only person that you have any control over is yourself. So worrying about what other people are doing is a complete waste of time and resources, because you can't affect them. You should just be looking and saying, well, what can I do to improve this situation, right? Even if the situation is genuinely 100% not your fault, it is still not productive to go, well, he was bad, so of course we lost. It is infinitely more productive to say, well, what could I have done? Even if it only increased my chances of winning by, like, 0.1%. That's still an increase in my chances of winning, dog, and that's a more productive approach than just going, well, my tanks wouldn't move through the choke, so I didn't get to do any damage. Because then you've just completely erased, like, any possibility of you doing anything to improve the situation. It was wholly out of your hands. There's usually something you can do to increase your chances, even if ever so slightly. So there you go. So next up, and this is the last question for this week, is how to have impact as a support in this meta. And I'm basically, like, this is going to be a very depressing answer for you. If you play a support, you're not going to like this answer very much. But the answer is basically, you do your job. There's not very much you can currently do to really make big plays as a support. Because, you know, the big plays support is Ana, basically. And Ana is currently not very good because of double shield meta being really inconvenient for her. You can still play Ana, you know, you still play Ana. If you love Ana, go ahead, play Ana. I'm not gonna tell you to stop, but, you know, it's a lot harder to get shit done as Ana now, and the meta supports, as I said earlier, are, Lucio and Moira. And I think I might have just started the same replay a second time. The Lucio and Moira cannot do much to really make big plays in the game, because basically, like, the biggest thing you can do as Lucio or Moira is just have your ult sound barrier for every time Sigma uses his ultimate. That's about it, really. Like, that's the biggest impact you're gonna have, because what else, like, what are you doing as Moira, right? You're building your ult charge off of Damage Orb, and you're using Coalescence, basically, because it goes through shields, right? But you're never gonna kill a bunch of people with it unless the enemy team have done something, like, really fucking stupid. So, basically, the best thing you could, like, that's the most productive you can be, really, is just do your job, don't die, heal your teammates, and try to build your ultimate. That's kind of it right now, to be honest with you. Support's always been more this way than the other roles, where they are beholden to their team. I would say this meta in particular is the most egregious example of it that we've probably ever seen in Overwatch, where the supports have very little agency over the game right now. Just because, I mean, the two that are really meta right now, there's not a lot you can do, really. Like, Moira has very little, like, playmaking potential. All you can do is, like, the most big plays you can do is, like, break the bongo with Coalescence and, like, sip some people to death. That's kinda it. Lucio, same thing. Sometimes you'll get some kills now, and then you might boop the enemy team off a ledge, but that's gonna depend a lot on the game, the map, and the enemy team, so all you can really do right now as a support is your job, and hope that's good enough. Yeah. I told you weren't gonna like the answer very much. It's just, you know, games like this are like this sometimes, where games that are continually updated and the meta shifts around frequently, you know? Like, sometimes certain roles are just gonna really get fucked, basically, like that, because, I mean, it's like the perfect congregation of effects, where right now Ana doesn't do so well. She's the main playmaking support, and the two meta supports are ones that have fairly low playmaking potential. Outside of, like, the enemy team, like, doing something ridiculous and you killing 4 people with a boop as Lucio, or maybe, like, 3 people were out of position, you got to coalesce him to death as Moira. All of these things are dependent on the enemy team, not your own play. It's dependent on the enemy team fucking up, which is inconsistent, to say the least, in terms of effectiveness, so there you go. I know, it's a depressing answer, but it's the one I've got for you, unfortunately. So that was the last question for this week, so now we gotta wait for this game to end, and I've gotta fill space. So I'm very excited, because Gogeta is going to come out on the 26th. It is the 23rd at time of speaking right now. I'm unlikely to have the money for him on the 26th, so for me, it'll have likely come out on the 27th. But I'm very excited. He looks like a very good character, which also upsets me simultaneously, because I don't really like to play the heroes that are extremely top tier. Just because I don't want to be playing like 12,000 mirror matches, you know? Like, if I played Bardock right now, I'd be playing against Bardock like 80% of the time as Bardock. It's just depressing. Same if I played, like, Kid Goku. But Kid Goku's God's mistake, so there was no fear of me ever doing that. But, like, you see a lot of them right now. And it looks like Gogeta's gonna be pretty fucking strong. Like, he seems to have everything you could want as a Dragon Ball FighterZ character. So, I'm gonna play him regardless, just because I love him as a character. So, regardless. And I think it evens out, because the other two members of my team, Vegito and Android 21, not particularly strong characters. Android 21 is one of the least played characters in the game, because in many ways she is just a less good version of Kid Buu, so, you know. And Vegito has just basically always been solidly, like, okay, acceptable character, you know. So it evens out in the end. Alright, look at that. Didn't have to fill very much space. How about that? Great talk, great talk. So thank you very much for watching if you did. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to answer. If you haven't already, you can join our Discord and ask questions more directly and have a conversation about them, or just shitpost with us. I've started streaming on Twitch Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 8 PM EST till midnight EST. There's a link to the channel in the description. And if you managed to make it all the way through the video and somehow still enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe for more content of middling quality in the future. And I hope you found the video helpful.